Hi everyone, and in today's video we're going to take an in-depth look at the FOmar. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video for Phantasy Star Online Blue Burst. In today's video we're going to continue the series of class guides for people who've come back to PSO or maybe picking it up again after a long absence. Or even people who are starting it for the first time. And today we're going to look at the FOmar. So FOmar is one of the force classes. The way we normally start with these videos is we break down the name of the class. So as I've mentioned in previous videos, PSO uses a naming system for each of its classes to denote what kind of class they are and what gender they are. So FOmar basically means means force, so a technique user, and mar is the suffix that the game uses to denote a male human. So a FOmar is a male human force. So it's quite a simple one to remember. So what we'll do is we'll go through what FOmar excels in, what they're not so good at. We'll do a stat breakdown, and we'll also go through some recommended gear as well. Now, I will preface this video by saying that FOmar is probably one of the classes I am least familiar with in PSO. I haven't really had many high-level FOmars at all. So if anyone wants to correct me on anything in the video that I may get wrong, by all means, leave a comment below. Just to give you guys a warning that this might not be as in-depth as some of my other videos. What we'll do is we'll move on to the stats first, and just so you get an idea of how the stat distribution is for FOmar. So again, just to cover this quickly, this character I'm using here is on the Affinia sandbox account. So Affinia has a mode where you can essentially make a character and use commands to level them to 200, spawn items and so on. And it's mainly used so you can play around with the characters and test builds out. You can't play with other people on the server if you use a sandbox account, so just bear that in mind. This is just for the purposes of this video, just for demonstration purposes. So what we'll do is we'll look at the stats first. So at level 1, if we compare FOmar to other classes. So at level 1, we start with 29 HP, which is the joint highest of all the forces. It's roughly on par with the human rangers. For TP, we start with 79, which is the joint lowest of the forces, joint with FOmar. We start with 16 attack power, which is identical to all the other forces apart from FOnewworld, which is a bit lower. Start with 10 defense, which is middle of the road. We start with 53 mental strength, which is the lowest of the forces, again joint with FOmar. We start with 63 ATA for accuracy, which is the highest, joint at highest of the forces, again joint with FOmar. And our evade is 35, which again is the lowest of the forces, joint with FOmar. So what you can see is that their stats are pretty much, in fact, looking at this on the Affinia wiki, they actually have identical stats to FOmar at level 1 in every single stat. As they level up though, the stat increases will be different for each of those classes, so they will end up quite different later on. So that's level 1. If we then factor in level 200, and this is level 200 without any materials, without mags and so on, FOmar will end up with 1175 HP, which is kind of average for a force, but still low. We go to 1783 TP, which again is it's the second lowest of the forces. It's a bit ahead of FOmar, but we are quite far behind FOneum and FOnewworld. Then for attack power, we go to 753, which is actually the highest of all the forces. 753 is actually higher than a little bit higher than Raymal as well, so it's actually not too bad for attack power. Our defense is 321, which is actually the lowest of any class in the game. So we are very, very fragile. So our mental strength goes to 990, which is the second lowest of the forces. It's a little bit ahead of FOmar, but we are quite far, well, we're a little bit behind FOneum, and we're quite a way behind FOnewworld. Our ATA accuracy goes to 138, which is kind of middle of the road for a force. So we're actually this a little bit ahead of FOnewworld and quite a bit ahead of FOneum, but we are quite a little bit behind FOmar. So we're kind of average for accuracy. And then evade, we go to 551, which again is roughly average for a force, but significantly far behind FOnewworld. If we then go to maximum stats, so maximum stats is with full material plan and a mag and so on. At level 200, we go to 1,425 HP, which again is about average for a force. Our TP goes to 2,558, which is very, very good, but is actually the second lowest of the forces. We're a little bit ahead of FOmar, but we are quite a way behind FOnew, and we're way behind FOnew. FOnew actually has about 600 TP more. Our attack power goes to 1002, which is significantly ahead of any other force. And again, is at that point then we are a little bit behind Raymal, because Raymal does get better attack power growth overall, but for forces we are ahead of all the other ones by quite a bit. The next highest being FOmar at 872. Our defense we go to 470. So it's quite interesting because at level 200 base stats, we have the lowest defense in the game of any class. But with maximum stats, we actually do eke ahead of some of the other classes. So we do actually get ahead of FOnew, and we also get ahead of FOnew as well. We're a little bit behind FOmar. However, as I've said in other videos, maximum stats is something you shouldn't really focus too much on, because quite often to get maximum stats on your class, you will have to use a lot of materials in areas you don't want to. So an example for this would be to max a FOmar, you would have to use a ton of defense materials to get that max stats, which could be used better elsewhere. So that's our defense. If we move on to mental strength, we go to 1,340, which is a little bit ahead of FOmar, but we are quite a bit behind the two Newman forces. Accuracy, we go to 163, which is actually the lowest of any class in the game. So we do have some accuracy problems with FOmar. Having said that, we're not that far behind FOmar, and not many of the forces have great accuracy anyway, the highest being FOnew with 186. And then evade, we go to 651, which is kind of average for a force. So what you can see, if we look at particularly the max stats, what you can see is that we are relatively sort of middle of the road for things like health, TP, mental strength, and so on. We're low accuracy and we're low defense generally. But you can see that we've got like a nice spread of stats, and this is kind of a hint of how FOmar works. So quite often FOmar is used not as like a straight up nuker. So if you go back to my FOnew video, with that class you essentially just use techniques. With FOmar, there is a bit of a mix, so you are they're quite often played as like a hybrid class, so you will use techs when techs are more convenient, but you do have the ability to switch up to melee if you need to. So that's kind of an example of how the stat distribution plays into that. So what we'll do now is we'll look at the techniques that FOmar gets. So with FOmar, obviously we're a force, so we get access to basically everything for techs. So if we go to our tech menu, on this character I've only learned a couple of techs because again it's a sandbox character. But with FOmar, you get access to all of the simple techs. So we get Foi, Zonde, and Barter up to level 30. We get Gifoi, Gizonde, and Gibarta all up to level 30. We get Rafoi, Razonde, Rabarta, Grants, and Megid all up to level 30. We get Resta up to level 30, Anti up to level 7, and we can learn Reverser. And then we get Shifter, Deband, Jelen, Zalo all up to level 30. And we get Ryuka as well. So we get everything basically because we are a force. Now, as I covered in the FOnew video, quite often forces will have boosts to certain techniques that give them bonus damage or bonus range. For FOmar, there are quite a few different boosts that you get. So the first boost that we get with FOmar is a boost to our normal techs. So we actually get a 30% damage boost to Gifoi, Gizonde, and Gibarta. Now this is actually huge because Gifoi is actually one of the most useful techs in the entire game. And particularly at high level with a force, it is incredibly good for taking care of crowds of enemies. So having that native 30% attack power, well 30% damage boost on Gifoi is massive. Next thing we get is we also get a 30% boost to our Grants damage. So our Grants will do 30% more damage as well, which is actually really, really useful because in Ultimate there are some enemies that are only weak to light. Things like Hill Delts, they don't really take much damage from anything apart from light. So having that 30% boost to Grants is always really useful. And finally, we also actually do get, for Shifter and D-Band, we actually get a double range for it as well. So we can buff our party from a bit further away as well. So that's the boost that FOmar gets. So we get a nice spread of boosts overall. We get, that nice damage boost on all of our normal techs. And we get the increased damage on grants. And as well as that, we also get double range on Shifter and D-Band as well. So it makes it, again, very versatile and quite a flexible class overall. So that's the techniques anyway. So now what we'll do is we'll have a look at some gear that you might want to use for a FOmar. So first thing we'll look at is the mag. So full disclosure, again, I'm not too familiar with this class. What I've done is I've actually looked at the Affinio wiki just to see what some recommended mag builds are for this class, just because I don't want to give you guys wrong information. So what we've got is here we've got a level 200 mag, and this has 5 defense, 117 power, 46 dex, and 32 mind. This is what Affinio calls a min-max mag. So straight from the Affinio wiki, this is a mag that it'll max as many character-specific stats as possible by level 200 by using the minimum amount of slot units to boost those stats. So what this does basically is it will max the stats that are important to the class. So things like mental strength, attack power for FOmar as well. So it will do that, and it will do it by using the least units as possible. And what you'll notice is that we actually have a very big power mag, which you might find unusual for a force. That is because FOmar, to max those important stats, will need a lot more power than mind. Now, you will back this up generally by using quite a lot of mind materials anyway. So you'll get a lot of your mind just from using mind materials. Obviously, you can work around this stat distribution, so you could drop the power and have more mind if you wanted to, and then use more power materials than mind materials. It'll work the same either way. So this is one option. If you do want to go with a pure mind mag, you can go that route. If you want to go full nuker and just use hex on everything, that is totally fine. Just be aware that if you are doing that, some of the other forces will do better. So you would be better off with a full nuke or a full new world if you want to go that route. But if you wanted to go that route, you can. Other options as well, you can also go with, if you want an absolute max stats mag, then you want to go with 5, 112, 20, 63. But that does involve a massive investment in other gear as well. So FOmar is a very hard class to max. To max it would actually need a V101, a V801, an Adept, a Red Ring, and loads of materials. So it's very, very obstructive to do it. So generally I wouldn't recommend doing that. Something like this should be fine. I mean, to be honest, you could just go with a mag that's got, say, 100 power and a bit more mind if you want to, if you want a more balanced option. But this is the stat layout that you want to go for if you want to max your stats by, max your important stats by level 200. In regards to photon blasts, again, I would just recommend the usual 3, just Estella, Pillar, and Malleola. I know I say the same for every video, but these generally are the most 3 important photon blasts. You've got Estella for your main damage source, Pillar if things get around you, or if someone else is using Estella in a chain, and you've got Malleola and Eula. On a force, you're only going to use it to support photon blast change. You're not going to actually use it yourself solo because you've got a higher level shifter and D-band already. So that's your mag. Next up, we'll cover. So we'll equip that mag. Next we'll cover some defensive gear. So shields. Main one I would recommend honestly is the Giffey merge. Now there are shields with much better stats obviously. Giffey merge though gives you a really nice boost to your Giffey damage, and you've obviously already got that 30% boost natively from being a FOmar. Giffey, as I've mentioned, is an incredibly useful tech, so if I show you that now, maybe let's get an idea actually. If I can get something to spawn here that's weak to fire. Yeah, if I can bring these Vulmas over here. Honestly can't remember if they're weak to fire or not. So you can see that's like 552 damage, and that's with a basic cane. And the advantage of using Giffey is if you spam it over and over again, you can kind of lock enemies in place with it because it flinches them every time it hits them. So what you'll find is quite often you'll get forces just standing in the middle of the room spamming Giffey because you'll just consistently interrupt things. It can also catch things on spawn as well, so as things are spawned in, sometimes it'll hit them when they spawn, and it will actually pretty much take out things instantly if it does spawn damage to them. So certain enemies seem to be vulnerable to that. Things like slimes and so on seem to just die instantly to it. So I would definitely recommend the Gifoy merge just for that native boost to your Gifoy damage. There are obviously other options as well. So, you can go with things on Affinia like the Anti-Dark Ring, which will give you a massive dark resist, which is always going to be useful in episode 2. There is other shields as well that you can go for, just that the Gifoy merge is just so useful for its boost to Gifoy. You can obviously take advantage of the other merges as well, so you could go with Gizonde merge. I would say Gibata merge, but honestly, I don't find Gibata a very useful tech overall. I would probably actually go more towards a Rabata merge instead, even though you don't get a boost to Rabata. Rabata is just a far more useful tech than Gibata overall. So that's what I'd probably go for defensive for the shield. In regards to armor, there's a few options. So the first one I'd look at is maybe something like 13. So 13 is an armor, it's Blue Burst exclusive. It's got okay stats. It gives you pretty nice dark resist, but not much in the way of other resistances. The main advantage of 13 is it boosts certain weapons, so it boosts things like the Slicer of Assassin, the Disco of Liberator, and the Disco of Braveman. Now, as we mentioned, FOmar is kind of a hybrid that uses a mixture of melee and techniques as well. So 13 actually gives a really nice boost to Disco of Braveman, which has a Berserk special. This means that if you compare this with a Disco of Braveman with hit, you can actually do some really, really nice melee damage with a FOmar by using that. So that is definitely one option to look at. Even though FOmar's attack power may not seem fantastic overall, it's not too bad for a force, and you can't underestimate how strong level 30 Shifter is. Combined with level 30 Zalura as well, so if you're using level 30 Shifter and level 30 Zalura, you're going to have a massive attack increase and lower the enemy's defense by a lot as well. And then using this boost from 13 will let you do really, really nice damage with Disco Braveman. Another option you can go with is something like the Ignition Cloak. Again, this is Blue Burst exclusive. It's got reasonable stats. It gives you really nice fire resist, but not much else. The main reason you use this is because the Ignition Cloak gives you a 10% boost to all of your fire attacks. Now, the main benefit of that for you with the FOmar is going to be for that extra 10% boost to Gifoy. So what you can see is we are piling quite heavily into Gifoy. Obviously, if you're in an area where things aren't really weak to fire, then you're going to look for other things that boost other elements. So, for example, if you're in a place where there's a lot of ice weak things, you might want to use something like the Congeal Cloak, which boosts ice. If you're in somewhere where a lot of things are weak to lightning, you might want to use something like the Tempest Cloak. So there are options. There's also the Select Cloak as well, which I think boosts grants. So that's a few options there. In regards to units, again, a few options. So I recommend this unit on basically more or less every class. So V101. So V101 boosts your attack speed by 40%, same as a Heavenly Battle. It also gives you a 15 boost to your attack power, evade, defense, mental strength, and luck. It also increases your accuracy by 1.5. The accuracy increase is negligible, but the main reason you use it is for those big stat boosts and the attack speed boosts as well. Fantastic unit. If you don't have this, you can go with a Heavenly Battle to boost your melee attack speed because you are going to be using melee with a FOmar. Or you could, if you're on an older version or on Classic, you can sub that for something like a God Battle. I wouldn't go any lower than God Battle. Once you get down to things like Devil Battle, the attack speed increase isn't that noticeable. You can still notice it, but it's just not that useful. Next, I would go with V801. So V801 gives you a very small mental strength boost of 5. But it decreases, what it says what it does is it decreases technique casting time. There's a couple of things that this actually does. So what V801 does is it shortens the technique animation time, but it's the actual frames of the animation. So I might be able to show this. So what I'll do is I'll set my Gifoy. And what you can see is that with a standard Gifoy, this is without V801. You can see it's quite a long animation. So if we then switch the V801 in and do the same again, you might not be able to tell too much, but it is quicker. So V801 is always a unit I would definitely recommend to forces. The downside of it is a little bit awkward to get. There's not many IDs that actually find it. So you may need to either make a new character to hunt it on a different ID, or you may need to rub some friends in to help you hunt it, or just trade for one. But it's definitely a unit I would recommend going for with a Force. It can even be useful on some other classes that use text, so even classes like Hugh Newell can get some mileage out of it as well. But for Forces, definitely. Next one is Adept. So Adept is a unit that raises your attack power, your mental strength, evade, defense, and luck by 10. It increases your accuracy by 20, which is huge. Raises all of your resistances by 6, and it cuts your TP consumption by 25%. This, I can't stress this enough. This is game-changing for Forces. I can't remember if I mentioned it in the Full New World video, and I probably should have done. But this unit is absolutely fantastic for Forces, mainly because of the last part. Because one of the big problems with any Force is that you will run out of TP quite quickly. This obviously makes a huge difference to that by cutting your TP consumption by 25%. So if we equip that and Cascafoy, you can see, although we are still using a reasonable amount of TP, it is a noticeable difference from if I then unequip it and cast again. It might be quite hard to tell, but it is actually quite a big chunk of difference. So Adept is definitely something I would go for. If you're new to the game and you don't know how to get Adept, you might be looking for the drop charts trying to find it. You won't be able to. The way you get Adept is you want to be looking for a unit called Limiter. Once you found Limiter, then you equip it and you kill, I believe, it's either 10 or 20,000 enemies. I can't remember which, honestly. It's either 10 or 20,000. I'll put an overlay on to let you know which is right. But basically, you want to kill a certain amount of enemies with Limiter equipped. Limiter actually reduces your stats slightly while it's equipped, so it's actually a bit of a drawback. But once you've killed a certain amount of enemies with it equipped, you'll be able to use the unit and it'll turn into Adept. So it's like an unseal, basically. For your other units, you got a bit of flexibility, so obviously you can go with anything that boosts stats, so you could go with things like Centurion ability, you could go with things like, staple useful units like Cure Freeze, anything like that. So you've got a little bit of flexibility with FOmar, which unit you want to use. You could go into things like power units if you want to boost your attack power more, or mind units if you want to boost your mental strength more. You could even run a unit like Smart Link, so if you're using anything ranged like Charge Vulcans, for example, running Smart Link will help you negate that accuracy penalty that Forces and Hunters have. So that's another option you can use. Next up, we've got weapons. So first one, we'll start with the easy ones. So these three here, so Fire Scepter Agni, Ice Staff Dagon, and Stormwand Indra. Now, this is very similar to what I mentioned in the Full New World video. So in the Full New World video, I said that they can get really good mileage out of the Club of Laconium, Mace of Adamant, and the Club of Zoomurin because they boost simple techs. This is kind of the same thing, but for normal techs for FOmar. Yeah, so Fire Scepter Agni actually boosts all of your fire techs by 20%, whereas Laconium boosts Fire alone by 40%. So generally for a Full New World, you're going to pass over Agni and you're going to go for a Club of Laconium instead because you've only got the boost in simple techs anyway. With a FOmar though, obviously your main focus is on those Gi techs, so Gifoy, Gibata, Gizonde. Even if, as I've said, you might skip over Gibata anywhere. So because of that, these three weapons are actually really useful. So Fire Scepter Agni is a really nice one for boosting all of your fire techs, particularly Gifoy by 20%. Ice Staff Dagon boosts all of your ice techs by 20%. Stormwand Indra boosts all of your lightning techs by 20%, so they're really, really useful. Next up, in the same vein, we've got the Mercurius Rod. So Mercurius Rod is a Blue Burst exclusive. If you are playing other versions, you can sub this out for the Caduceus. I believe you actually use the Caduceus to make this in a quest. Because this is actually gotten from an exchange shop in, I think it's in Claire's Deal that you get this from. So you actually need a Caduceus to make this. Caduceus and this both boost grants. So Mercurius Rod is a bigger grants boost overall, so it is the better choice if you're on Blue Burst, but you would be absolutely fine with Caduceus as well. So that is to take advantage of the grants boost that FOmar has. So Fire Scepter Agni, Ice Staff Dagon, Stormwand Indra, and Mercurius Rod or Caduceus are all there just to capitalise on those boosts that you get from your techs normally. Next up, we've got the Psycho Wand. This is obviously very much an endgame hunt. So Psycho Wand is a very interesting weapon. So the way Psycho Wand works is every time you cast a tech, that tech will cost 50% of its normal TP. Obviously, combine this with something like Adept is fantastic because then you get an even more of a reduction. The downside of Psycho Wand is that it takes the full TP cost of that tech off your HP. So just to show you how that works, you can see here if we go to Gifoy, this Gifoy level 30 requires 40 TP. So what the Psycho Wand will do is it will make... What I'll do actually is I'll take the Adept out of my armor so you can see this properly. So what you can see is, so it's 40 TP to cast Gifoy. What Psycho Wand will do is it will take 20 TP off me instead of 40, but then it will take 40 health off me. So if I cast Gifoy with a Psycho Wand, you can see there, it's 20 TP, but it is taking 40 health off me every time I do this. Now, the reality is it's not too big a deal because it's honestly not too much of a health deficit anywhere. And obviously you can use Rester as well to heal that. But Psycho Wand is fantastic for that. Psycho Wand also gives you some really big boost to your damage as well. So I believe it boosts all of the, I think it's the Ratex it boosts by quite a significant amount. It can also cast some simple tech with special attack as well. So it's a very, very useful weapon. And it just overall is a very, very strong force weapon. Downside of it, obviously, is that it is an extremely hard drop to get. It drops on every single section ID, but there is no easy drop for it. You are going to be putting a lot of time into the game to hunt this. So you can see that the Gifoy is actually really useful for sort of crowd control. So you can see with that Lily there, for example, that it kept getting stunned by the Gifoy. So that is one example I would definitely go for. There is other options as well. So there's other weapons that boost some tech. So things like the Prophets of Mortav also boost some techs as well. Again, though, that is a very, very rare drop. So it's up to you which you want to go for. Psycho Wand is definitely a really good choice. You can also, if you want to go in the melee route, so we've already discussed a bit that FOmar can be used as a melee class as well. So in that case, there are other weapons that you might want to look at if you want to play more of a melee focus. So next up, we'll go on to some melee weapons that you might want to use with FOmar because, as I've said, it is kind of a hybrid class. So the first one to look at is, I mentioned it a bit earlier, but the Disco Braveman. So really, really easy drop, and I would just hunt one until you've got one with hit. Because obviously FOmar has very low accuracy, so anything you can do to remedy that is going to help. So obviously, if you're using Disco Braveman, you want to be using it with 13 for the set boost. See, even just using like the normal hits, we're actually doing pretty good damage there. Obviously, the main reason it uses though is for the special attack. So if we go with the special, you can see we actually do really nice damage with this. Obviously, you need to be careful because because you are sacrificing your health to do that damage, but it is a really nice bit of damage. So nearly 700 damage from a melee force is kind of insane. On the same sort of theme, if you want to go Berserk, you've also got weapons like Excalibur. You can see there, nearly 1100 damage a hit is actually insane, and it makes FOmar an incredibly strong class solo. So again, you can see we've nearly killed that Nano Dragon in 2 hits. So we are an incredibly strong class, particularly if we do capitalize on things like Berserk. So I would definitely recommend a weapon like Excalibur. If you're playing another version and you don't have Excalibur, you can look for any of the weapons that have got Berserk or Sacrificial Specials. So, but even just something like that Disco Braveman that I mentioned, that's always going to do really well for you as well. Other examples is weapons like the Slicer of Fnatic. So Slicer of Fnatic is quite an interesting weapon. So it's a blue burst only slicer. It actually hits one target less than a normal slicer. And it has a demon special, and it also has some of the highest attack power of a slicer as well. So obviously with demons, we're cutting enemy HP by 75%. And we get the full benefit of that because we're a human character. The downside of the Slicer of Fnatic though is we do hit one target less, and generally the Disco of Braveman in most situations will actually outperform it, particularly if you get on with hit and you're using it with 13. But this is another perfectly viable option if you want to go with Slicer of Fnatic. There is also, if you want to go with ranged, I would definitely recommend using a unit like Smart Link just to help you out with the range penalty. But if you are going to use ranged, you can use weapons like the Bringer's Rifle. So the Bringer's Rifle, again, has a HP cutting special. I've actually found it rare. A Fortune drop. What a shame it's on Sandbox and I've got no use for it. So you can use things like the Bringer's Rifle or the Holy Rare, which will give you that range that you need as well. So for places like Control Tower, that allows you to snipe things from across the gaps in the tower without getting too near. Yes, you can use Tex as well, but sometimes you might want to use something like Holy Rare to paralyze enemies or Bringer's Rifle to cut their HP down. So they're totally viable options as well. So next thing we'll talk about is where FOmar sort of fits into a party. So FOmar, obviously in a party, it's always going to be welcome in a party because it's a force, simple as that. So forces are always really, really useful in multiplayer just because having level 30 shifter and D-band is a huge, huge boost to everyone's overall output. Now, yes, it's not going to boost other forces' technique damage, but it'll, obviously give them the defense boost they need. Having level 30 Gel and Zalua is obviously going to weaken enemies by a significant amount, so you are always going to be a really useful asset to your party as a force, regardless of which force you play. The advantage of FOmar is that you can also then help out with the melee side of things as well. So you are this really good like hybrid role. So because of that, you can kind of go backwards and forwards between using melee and using force techs. To be honest, it kind of works similar to... It kind of works quite similar to classes like Hugh Newell or Rhea Mal in that it's kind of a good support class. But with FOmar, it is probably quite an even mix overall. So, yeah, so you can be quite versatile with a FOmar overall. You can switch quite easily between using Tex and using melee. So you've always got those options. Now, yes, in a party that's got a force already, you're going to be outclassed for tech damage, and if there's something like a Hugh cast in the party, you're going to be massively outclassed for melee damage as well. So you are in this kind of void in between where you are always going to be outclassed in some area, but you provide a nice mix of both. So it is kind of, I'd almost call it a bit of a jack of all trades class. It's reasonably good at melee and reasonably good at teching. It is also a very, very strong solo class, actually, just because level 30 techniques are incredibly strong. And having the ability to use reliable melee as well, it just makes it an incredibly versatile class overall. So if you want to play solo and you want to use a male character or you want to use a force, FOmar is actually a really, really solid choice. So that's kind of where I see FOmar fitting into a party overall. Yes, if you're wanting the absolute best technique damage, then FOmar is not going to be the class for you. You want to go for something like a FOneum or a FOnewell, depending on what text you're using. Similarly, if you're wanting full-on melee damage, you're going to go for a Hunter instead. But if you want a nice mix of both where you can just slide back between each of the two, then FOmar is actually a really, really decent choice for that. So what we'll do now is we'll warp to a boss fight. It's one of the advantages of playing the sandbox servers. We can do that, just so you can get an idea of how FOmar works in a typical boss fight. So I'll buff up first. And what we'll do is we'll warp to the Silver Dragon. Again, obviously you can't do this on a normal gameplay. This is just a thing with the sandbox. So this should just give you a rough idea of how FOmar can be played. So we'll start out with the Cycle Wand. And we'll use a mixture of like Gifoy and Rafoy. Now, because the Silver Dragon's quite fast, we probably don't have time to cast Gifoy initially. So we can probably cast it once we get to here. So now the dragon's down, we can switch to the Excalibur. We could use potentially Zalua as well, but to be honest, we barely need to because we do so much damage with this already. I think we're already at the damage threshold there. Yes, we are. So now we heal up and switch back to the Cycle Wand. And he'll hit it quite easily when it's in the air. Occasionally we can get the dragon down before it digs underground, but not always. We do need to be a little bit careful with our health, just because obviously we are using the Psycho Wand and it is hurting us every time we cast, but overall it's not really too big a deal, to be perfectly honest. So I'll wait for the dragon to burst back out again. Again, because of the range of our level 30 text, we can start hitting it from here. And generally, as soon as it lands, it'll die. And there we go. So that's a rough example of how you can play FOmar. Now, obviously, we would do a lot more damage using the Gifoy tech instead. However, certain enemies don't really allow you to use it too easily, because Gifoy, even with V801, does have quite a long cast time. So for bosses like the dragon that move quite quickly, and particularly for the Sailor Dragon, because you do get frozen if you get touched by it. So for some enemies, it can be better sometimes to use Ratex just for the faster casting. So that's one option. You can also use Simple Text as well if you want to. So I hope it's been relatively useful overall. Just to give you a rough idea of how you can play FOmar in a boss fight. Again, I've said this a few times, but this is not a class I'm totally familiar with. It's certainly not one I've spent a lot of time with before. So if there is any inaccuracies or anything, please do feel free to point them out below. Because I want this to be as accurate as possible for people. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider liking or subscribing to the channel. We do generally 2 uploads a week, usually 1 PSO upload and 1 NGS upload, although occasionally we do cover other games like Phantasy Star Universe as well. We also do 1 live stream a week on Sundays, which is typically either PSO or another Phantasy Star game, although we will occasionally play other things as well. You can also follow me on Twitter, which is, or X, whatever you want to call it, at Section Skylight, and I do upload on there whenever I'm putting a new video up or whenever I'm going live, so feel free to follow me on there as well. But hope that's been useful. These class guides will continue with other classes as well, so if your favourite class hasn't been covered yet, don't worry, it will be coming down the line. But yeah, I'll end this one there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.